Cool, Dan. Thanks so much for jumping on with us.
Yeah.
Basically, like we said, the whole goal of the How to Build an App podcast is to help just really give people who are just getting started nuggets of advice because it's hard. There's a lot of information on building a brand, getting started with SEO and marketing, but not a lot when it comes to building a tech company. So I guess for background's sake, tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, and what your field is.
Sure. So I grew up in Utah, born and raised. Spent my whole life here. Love it. There's a lot to kind of explore. It's a great place to be. I think there's also a lot happening, kind of in terms of like the startup ecosystem and everything else. But really, I've always been kind of an entrepreneur from like my very early days. I remember I think I was in my teens connecting to like bulletin boards. If anybody remembers what those are with modems that made these funny sounds. And I remember hearing about the internet and talking to my dad about getting like some extra phone lines installed so we could set up, some internet thing in the house. And it's like, oh, that internet thing, it's a fad. So I've always just been excited about technology and really trying to just find more optimized ways of getting things done. So I've had a number of small businesses and, several exits that have done very well. And I've really enjoyed the journey along the way. Most of my background is more in consumer products, so outdoor sporting goods in particular. And I still own a couple brands in that space, and I love it. I love small business. I love building and creating things. Being able to see, kind of your work and your product out, in the real world. And through those endeavors, the one thing that was always that I kind of caught on to early on as I was building different businesses is just the value of people, the value of talent within an organization. And so part of that is having, benefits and the culture and everything that really supports, your team. And kind of develops that culture of caring. And one of those I felt was a 401k, which when I tried to set it up previously, it was just a pain in the butt. And ultimately I gave up. And this happened twice. And so a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend, financial advisor, and, about this specific topic. And I said, why is this so hard? And his comment was exactly, if there was a solution for small businesses like yours, I think I could put 75 people on that platform right away. So as an entrepreneur, that gets my wheels turning. And, I started to look into it and decided that there was an opportunity within, kind of the 401k space to provide that benefit and that service for small businesses. So everything from companies of 1 to, 1,000. And that's what we've done at 401go is we've built a fully automated platform that allows businesses of any size to get a 401k up and running. And as boring as 401ks may be, like our goal is to change that. Our goal is to make them exciting. So it's one of those things where, employees are actually excited to have that as a benefit. And, we still have a lot of work to do, but we're getting there.
That's a steep curve you're trying to go
Yes.
to make a 401 exciting. Like, can you change the name to like a 402 or something? I don't know.
Right. I guess that would be the better, or add like an extra zero or something.
Yeah. The 4100. I don't know. No, that's kind of interesting. So it sounds like you were, you were just kind of entrepreneur. You didn't have a marketing background. You didn't have a technical background. How did you go from kind of the entrepreneur mindset to like a tech business? And like, what is your experience in technical? Do you have any, can you write code? Can you read code? Like, is there any technical in that?
There's very little. So I'm, like one of those 10-year college students. So I changed degrees and went to just about every university here in Utah and even one in Idaho. And
that's dangerous because there's 2 universities in Utah that don't like each other very much.
And I went to both of them. I went to both of them. So yeah, I can root for both teams. But during that kind of endeavor, I did, broadcast journalism, computer engineering. So I do have somewhat of a technical background. And I think, again, it was one of those things where I'm excited by technology. So I thought, hey, let me learn how to write code. And I learned, I think within, 1 or 2 semesters that I wasn't great at it. Takes an attention to detail that I don't necessarily have. But I've always appreciated it and I work well with kind of technical people. So one of my business partners for about 10 years is actually my brother. And I know that's like a topic in and of itself, working with family. And, Yes, it is difficult. I have another brother, and we kind of worked together for a while, and then I think we ultimately decided that didn't work. But with this one particular brother, Nate, it worked very well, and it's because he has a very technical background, which I can certainly appreciate. And my background is more in marketing and just business development in general. And because we trust each other, and we've built that trust over years of running businesses together, it made it a lot easier for subsequent businesses. So, prior to this, with even our e-commerce business, at one point we were in the top 3% of Amazon sellers. So we had 30,000 different products listed on Amazon. We had a software system that my brother had built, a very complicated ERP that was connected to hundreds of warehouses and logistics and supply chain, and it was 99% automated. The one thing that wasn't was really kind of customer support. And so we already had that technical background that allowed us to really focus on 401ks and say, okay, some of the challenges and the biggest challenges that we saw in the industry were related largely to back office operations. The service providers that are selling 401ks, they don't want to focus on small businesses because there's a lot of overhead. It takes about 8 weeks to set up a 401k with most providers. And that's because there's a lot of back office operations. So we looked at what we had done in kind of the e-commerce space and with logistics and everything else, and realized that there was a lot of similarities within the 401k space. And so by applying, some of those same rules of automation and ideas, we were able to reduce that 8-week setup process to, like, we get plans up and going in 10 minutes with no human involvement. So the software can handle everything. Yes, there's a human on one side deciding what that plan looks like, a business owner, but there's nothing required, in terms of back office operations to actually make that plan active. And nobody else has done that. So that alone is, very disruptive. I hate that term because I think it's overused, and I don't necessarily want to say that we're disrupting the space, because I think there's a lot of really good things about it. But we've made some significant improvements, and a lot of it is just due to that automation and experience from prior businesses where, in the e-commerce space, oftentimes we were dealing with margins on products that were in single digits, 2 to 3%. So we had to be extremely efficient. We didn't have these large, gross margins or really healthy unit economics that you see in a SaaS type business. And so, some of that efficiency has basically, and that experience has done very well for us in 401go.
Yeah, it's super interesting because we've even, I don't know, like a couple months ago, we started researching like the 401 stuff, benefit stuff for our employees, and whatever. And it's just a whole thing that's a huge,
it sucks.
thing.
Like, I just got my butt kicked. I still don't know anything about it. And I was like on calls with people. So I'm glad somebody's out there trying to fix it. 4100 go. That's what I'm all about.
So with 401 Go, tell us about like where you're at and like some of the milestones that you've hit that you've been excited for, because you've also just recently raised a round of funding. Tell us like how you got to that point, and like, again, some of the big milestones that you were able to hit.
We certainly had the benefit of prior experience, and with some of these exits, we had sufficient capital to bootstrap 401go for quite some time, which I think is always very helpful, and it puts I feel like a tech company on a good trajectory.
But it also looks good for investors too. Be like, hey, this company has their own skin into it. They've invested a ton of money of their own. You didn't start with investment, it sounds like.
Correct.
You guys bootstrapped it.
Yeah. So we bootstrapped for quite some time. We developed. Even the space that we're in right now, we're kind of crashing on the couch of one of my other companies. So we're leveraging a lot of those benefits of having prior businesses, which not everybody can do. But whatever it takes to bootstrap, and there's nothing. If anything, I feel like that's kind of. When I think of like Americana, when I think of, it's like the 4th of July, it's hot dogs, it's, it's parades and those types of things. And I think something that maybe is even more, is newer and more generational would be the side hustle, and I think that's awesome. I love it. I embrace it. And I encourage, anyone that, says, hey, I've always had this idea. I'm like, do it, whatever. Like, you don't need to tell me the idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. You should do it. And don't quit your day job. Like, first and foremost, do whatever you need to do to make sure that you have that ability to get it as far as you possibly can. And even when you think, oh, I can only go, I can only go another couple months and I've got to be full time on this. Go another year. I mean, push that envelope as hard as you possibly can. Do everything you can to avoid fundraising. And if you do that, then it allows you to have a little bit more leverage in those negotiations, and I think be better in a better position for when it does come time to fundraise. So our first round was a kind of $1 million angel friends and family round, and this was the first time that I've had a dozen other businesses, and I've never once asked family or friends or anybody to invest. And if somebody would have, I would have said no, just because of that. I don't want that responsibility of, it's enough when you're answering for your own money and you've got your own livelihood at stake. But when there's other people that are investing you, it takes that stress level to a new level. And so,
which I feel like is underrated, by the way. I feel like that little gem that you just said, when you start spending other people's money, it changes the pressure on you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, did you go to friends or family, or was it a little easier where they came to you, be like, hey, what do you have for us to invest in?
I went to friends and family that I knew they certainly had the ability to. So it wasn't a stretch for them. And I told them straight up, I'm like, there's a very, very high likelihood. And I gave them all the statistics that this is going to go to zero. And I told them that a dozen times. And at the end of the day, we ended up doing safes, and then we converted those into convertible notes. And what it really came down to is they didn't care what the instrument was. They trusted me, and they trusted the fact that I would have never gone to them if I didn't believe that this was a big opportunity for them. And I think in many ways it was even more of, it's not like the investments that they made had that significant of an impact. It didn't extend our runway by anything more than maybe a month or two. It was more a way of saying, look, you're friends and family, and this is something that I feel is going to be big. I'd love to have you be part of it. And so that was the main motivation behind it. There were a couple angels that came in and actually wrote some very sizable checks. And they were industry professionals. So these were advisors that were dealing in this space. And I think that, immediately they saw the value just because they had felt this pain so much themselves. And so if you're looking for investment, I would start there first. Find somebody that's going to benefit from whatever it is you're building. And if that's an organization or there's some, possibility of a strategic partnership, then they have a very vested interest in your success. And they likely can see the value more so than maybe just a VC firm that isn't as experienced, that hasn't felt the pain to that same degree.
So I guess tell us a little bit about like what you did before going and raising that round. Did you have like just a formal like business plan written out? Had you done like a bunch of market research? Had you talked to, because I mean, as employers, we all know the pain,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like talking directly to a traditional employee, they might not know the friction that involves there. So what all did you put together before you actually went to go and raise that round?
Also, sorry, just to add to that question,
Mm-hmm.
where were you at on revenue? Were you post-rev still when you went to the angel? Did you actually have a company because you bootstrapped for a while, right?
Yeah.
So to go along with Austin's question, where were you at on revenue-wise? Did you have revenue to show when going to them?
We did. We had revenue. We had great traction. So that was certainly helpful. When you actually have paid users, it does send a signal that, if you've got an MVP and it looks cool and it does all these amazing things, but you're having a hard time finding people to pay for it, it's going to be harder to get investment. But because people were willing to pay for this and we had traction, we've had no attrition, those are all good indicators that we're onto something. And so it made it that much easier. To get to that point, we did extensive amounts of research because when you look at the space that we're in, it's highly regulated. You have the IRS, the SEC, the Department of Labor, just to name a few, and they've all got their own.
Those are like the three worst, by the way. Like
right?
Those are the most, right? What do you want the ATF to jump in on this too? Or?
Exactly. So we get letters all the time from the IRS, and my brother are always like, I don't want to open it because if there's. In fact, I was like, they've got to do something different. Like maybe if they made their envelopes rainbow colored or something to help lessen the fact that it says IRS up in the left-hand corner. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot at stake. And so we looked at existing platforms and said, can we take, what is existing on the market and cobble together a solution? And that's what pretty much everybody has done before us, or do we need to build something from the ground up? So we spent about a year just researching the problem. And this was a little difficult because I don't have a background in the 401k space. So, my brother Nate, he read the IRS code, because the 401k is, it's this industry is named after a code in the IRS. So he actually read the code and learned this is what a 401k really is versus this is what, the industry has created. We looked at a lot of these existing platforms, and then we just started writing code, and we didn't do any fundraising until we actually had something in place. We had businesses that were on there that were using it. So this was very much a live environment, and we're dealing with tens of millions of dollars in assets and people's livelihoods and retirement. The stakes are high, so we had to be very slow and methodical in our approach. But at the same time, it's kind of given us that base that I think made it a little easier to fundraise than I've heard other people's experience have been.
So I kind of have like two questions. The first one is for the people who are considering working with family, what kind of like boundaries would you recommend setting? Because I'm sure like you've got to have some form of like business boundary and like personal boundary when you're starting to actually build a business with family, right?
Yeah.
Kind of explain some of like the nuances with that and things to talk about before starting. And then also kind of tell us about the time when you were starting to grow your team and bring in more developers, because I think there could be a little conversation around that too, because that's a challenge.
I would say the same wisdom applies for whether it's your brother or, oftentimes when you're co-founding in a business, it's most likely somebody you've worked with in the past or a friend, or, there is some personal connection. And I feel like first and foremost, you both need to decide what's the priority. Is it the friendship? Is it the organization? Is it the idea? And really kind of build the rules, the governing documents, whatever it may be, and very clearly establish what those expectations are. So, and I would say from the very get-go, operate with the idea that it is going to go south and that it's not going to work out. And what does that mean? Who steps away? Who keeps the business going? What does that look like? And so I think the best thing you can do is plan out every possible negative scenario, first and foremost, so that when or if that event occurs, you're following basically rules that you'd set in place when everybody was level-headed and excited and wanting to go forward, and when the priorities were aligned, whether that was the friendship or whether it was the organization. So I think that's first and foremost, and then really from there, it's clearly establishing who does what. And so I think it would be difficult if you had like two CTOs trying to do something. It's easy because at the end of the day, there's times where I say, hey, I feel this should happen with our app or whatever. And Nate very clearly says, no, we're not going to do that. And I just have to say, okay. So it's one of those things where we have that level of trust. And I think that unfortunately, that's something that's earned over time. But by clearly delineating who does what, who has authority, who has the responsibility, who is responsible for the various, performance indicators in the organization, helps to remove some of that ambiguity. And then just communicate like crazy. When there's something wrong, get it out in the open. It's hard. Like I'd say it's probably harder than marriage, but also so worthwhile. Like I love working with my brother. It's awesome. It has been beyond the businesses and everything else. The fact that I get to share this with my brother is huge. And at the same time, even some of the the team members that we have and the employees that we work with and everything else, it's such a rewarding experience that all of the headaches, all of the hassle, it's worth it. It's worth it.
Well, and I feel like there has to be a high level of trust there as well, right?
Yeah.
Like you trust your brother that he knows better than you in the tech world, and he probably trusts you to know the direction of the business is better through your vision, your direction and stuff. And so it doesn't mean
Yeah.
there shouldn't be pushback and there shouldn't be questions and communication, but at the same time, like there has to be enough trust there to say, yeah, all right, I trust you. You're right on that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's super important. So one of the things that it's funny because you've made the transition from, I wouldn't want to say retail, product based, like actual physical products. You've done
Yeah.
a couple different businesses, but you've transitioned into tech. What were some of the biggest things that surprised you specifically in tech that was hard? And what are some of maybe the misconceptions that you had before and that you realized like, oh, that's not the truth here?
For me, I think a lot of it comes down to, and this is by no means But hey, we're on 401k, so we're as boring as it can
Yeah,
be.
we're super exciting, right? But it's still a tech platform, right?
It is. No, it's very tech driven. And I think a lot of people don't really even understand or appreciate how tech based it is. I mean, it's an app. But for me, I think a lot of it comes down to just the unit economics, the accounting side of things, working in an industry where your gross margins are, let's say, 30%. To where now they're like 80 or 90%. It's a whole different world, acquisition costs and everything else. So I think a lot of some of those preconceived notions that I may have had from, and really that's what I think that's the language that every investor speaks, is accounting. And as boring as it may be, you've got to make sure that it checks that box for those investors. So you do have to understand unit economics. You do have to understand how you're going to monetize whatever it is you're building. And so for me, I think a lot of it just came down to really understanding the pro forma, and that's essentially kind of a profit and loss projection. And the other thing that was kind of an eye opener for me is in prior businesses having bootstrapped, I would try to build a pro forma financial so that I reach a point of profitability as soon as I possibly can. In tech, and especially something that's venture backed, that's not necessarily a concern. If anything, I'd say if you're reaching a point of profitability, they're saying, well, you're not spending enough. Like you should be growing faster. You should be accelerating more. And so that was something that was kind of hard for me to adjust to because a lot of my kind of background was maybe more risk adverse than what a VC firm would like to see. And so I had to, really kind of change my thinking to focus and align more with growth, user acquisition, and some of those metrics that I think are more meaningful to venture-backed organizations. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. The other part about an app is just really the scalability of things. In a way, I'd say the app and your technology is to a degree infinitely scalable. I mean, you guys know that's not true. There's certainly code can fall apart and there's infrastructure and everything else, but it's a lot easier to scale that than it is the back office processes and everything else. And so for us, being able to maintain a high level of customer support as we go from one business on the platform to 1,000 businesses on the platform, like that becomes the real challenge. And I think when you look at other organizations and the issues that they run into, it's almost always scale. And it's not necessarily scaling the technology, it's scaling all the operations and everything surrounding it.
I would say that's like one of the, even like we're a dev shop, we have about 20 to 25 people, developers and operation and management people that work with us. But that is something that we spend a crazy amount of time on just like figuring out. And it's something that I feel like usually kind of gets pushed off like at the end in general, is like really organizing and building like a scalable like process. And it's a super hard thing to do. I totally spent like 3 months shifting totally away from like writing code and helping people like drive their product to, okay, I've got to basically build a system to where everybody I bring in will understand it and it makes sense. And you've got to do it for 2 people. You've got to do it for the internal organization. And because you're a SaaS product, you have to make the onboarding experience super easy for the people actually using the product.
Yep.
These businesses actually using the product. And so you basically had to do that twice, which I applaud because that's hard.
Yeah.
Well, Austin, you and I, we always had this mentality of like, oh, when that bridge comes, we'll cross it. And those bridges come way quicker than you realize. Like, I remember it was funny. We were talking like, oh man, I guess when that happens, we'll just try to figure it out in less than, what was it, Austin, 3 weeks? We had we're like, if we're having to juggle multiple projects, more than what we're doing, like, oh, we'll cross that bridge when it comes. 3 weeks later, we have like 12 different projects all come land at the same time. We're just like, what do we do? And the amount of time and effort, and like, it was a nightmare trying to build those processes. And it's something that really people really do overlook. And I feel like that's such a good answer, because like, people don't think that's an important thing, but it really is. And it can really make or break a company real quick if you don't have your processes, one, internal. And Austin, you made another good point. You have to have a good onboarding and process for your actual client facing as well.
Yeah.
So speaking of breaking, I'm kind of curious, as like, I feel like as an entrepreneur, a person starting, especially a tech company, like tech is probably a black box for most founders. They have no idea how much work and how much effort actually goes into writing the code for the software to actually like work. And typically the easier it is to use, the more code cost and time that has to be put into it.
So true.
So as a founder, that can be like daunting. It can be really hard to have like your eye set on like this mountaintop when really like what you need to be doing is looking like in front of you. So tell us about some of like the milestones that you set individually that allowed your team to keep on pushing, right? Because you just said you did a whole year of research.
Mhm.
I can't imagine spending more than a couple hours of like research, right? So what were some milestones that you guys set that allowed you to keep pushing forward and investing and, waking up every morning and building this product?
So I think first and foremost, there's always kind of this stepping off point in every, kind of entrepreneurial journey where if we wait till we are ready, we'll never go. You have to, and for us, that was putting a plan on the platform, knowing that there's still things that we're going to have to do manually, that the automation isn't 100% there. If we waited till we were all comfortable, till kind of the compliance side of our co-founder relationship was comfortable, and engineering and everybody was comfortable, it never would have happened. And so as soon as you get that first customer, or once you have that beta client, whatever it may be, in our situation, it was the first plan on the platform. Now the clock's ticking. So we have reports that have to be filed on an annual basis. There's things that have to happen on a very regular basis. And so at that point, I think it's helpful because now we're moving by the cadence of our client. And so, we did have the benefit of being able to put, one of the businesses that I owned on there. So, if something blew up, it was less detrimental. But I think everybody should be able to find kind of a client like that, a first client. And I think that's helpful because now when you answer to somebody, it makes it easier to have kind of those firm deadlines. So for us, step one was getting a plan on the platform. And then really the next big milestone is in this industry, everything happens on, kind of a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And so once you complete all of those, various spans of time, then you've proven that you can do it. And that first year, there was a lot of concern about various aspects, like, is this really going to work? How's this compliance thing going to happen? Because we made a lot of assumptions that, and one of the other co-founders, Jared Porter, his background was in 401ks. And the reason that we actually brought him in and he became a co-founder was because we hired him as a consultant and we explained, this is what we want to do. And his first comment was, that's impossible. So we said, well, we want to work with you because we want you to tell us why it's impossible. And so over a series of conversations, he told us all the reasons why this wouldn't work. And as we continued to dispel those reasons, suddenly he's like, holy crap, maybe this is possible. And I think that having those critics is helpful. But I guess really what it comes down to is those milestones are going to be different for every organization. I mean, for us, there's certainly, I guess MVP to when you actually have that first client. That's certainly a milestone. Then when you have your first paying client, that's another milestone because oftentimes the first person's not paying. And then, from there, when you get the first investment dollar in, when you get the first partner, everything, every step of the way. And when you earn that first business, it's so much work. You put, hundreds of hours into it. And now, we have partners and plans coming to our platform and we're not really having to put any time or energy into it. But the first of everything is going to be hard. That first investor, the first client, the first partner, whatever it may be, the first is always going to be the hardest. So, for us, that's kind of the cadence. Raising that first $1 million, it was difficult. Raising the additional $2 million, that actually came pretty quick. The first 2 million came within literally like a week of when we said, hey, we're fundraising. We subscribed full 2 million of the 2.5. That remaining 0.5, I've been chasing for 2 months. So we finally said, hey, let's close the institutional side of this investment. And so we still have 500K of this $2.5 million round that's out there. But, we've got the investors. It's just a matter of moving at a time, at a schedule that's comfortable with them. And so that's kind of where we are now. But I've had probably over 100 different conversations with different investors and angel investors. And it's just part of, and even if I know like this is likely going to be a no, I still have the conversation. Because every time I do, my pitch gets better. My vision is more clear. I get more critical feedback. And so I'd say tell as many people as you possibly can, as much as you possibly can, and don't be worried about being turned down. That's just part of the process.
Well, and as a founder, you're required to have so many skills, especially as a technical founder. You're expected to have an idea of how technology works and how that you should put the pieces together. You're supposed to have an idea of how to manage teams. You're supposed to have an idea of an accounting. You're supposed to wear all of these hats. But one of the big things too is you're also supposed to have like the sales experience too. And I mean, that's like number one thing is to always go back, reinvite them, tell them a little bit more. Things change really, really quickly. So with your product, it's super complex. It's a super hard topic, and I imagine like to bringing engineers in. There's probably like a lot of things you look for because a lot of things can go wrong, right? So tell us about how you have expanded your engineering team and some characteristics that you looked for, and maybe give some advice to founders when they're hiring like that first dev or bringing in that first
Yeah.
technical co-founder.
So I think, and it's harder for me that I certainly understand and appreciate, and I've written code, so I understand it to a degree. But to the extent that I can recognize another brilliant developer, that's not a skill that I have. That's a skill that my brother has, and so that's where he's responsible for growing that team. And it really comes down to two things. We're looking, number one, for cultural fit, and number two, just technical brilliance. And that doesn't always come. So a recent hire for us, and I think her background is very interesting. She is an extremely talented musician, plays in symphonies and in New York, and has all the pedigree of anybody that, in this amazing trajectory within the world of music, and within the last couple of years decided to pivot into tech. And for us, that, I don't want to say untraditional, but just kind of that that different background, we value that, and we see a lot of similar skills. And so for us, I don't think it necessarily comes down to, have you been doing this for 12 years and what is your experience building similar products? What we're doing has not been done before, and I think that's the case for a lot of apps. And so if you find somebody that's been doing this for a long time, you're oftentimes going to bring along a lot of this, maybe these ideas or processes that should be reconsidered. And so for us, we love hiring new talent. And even though it may require more time getting them up to speed, we love the idea that there's no bad habits that have to be, that we have to really work through or whatever. And so while we might move slower, we feel that in the end, again, kind of that whole process of building a solid platform, a slower, more methodical approach will benefit us in the long run. And so that's the same, so those are some of the same values that we look for in engineers. And you can certainly find some engineers that have amazing talent and they can just pound stuff together extremely quick, but it's a little bit sloppy. And, that's not the way that doesn't work in an organization. And so it's difficult trying to find that. So every candidate goes through multiple screenings. I have a conversation with them, and some of the time, these are technical people that oftentimes have a difficult time in interviews, and we understand that. And we're not necessarily looking for somebody that, is a salesman and a coder or anything like that. But for us, we're just making sure that values align. I always say hire around values and skills and not necessarily experience. And then we'll train the skills and they'll gain the experience by working with a company. And I think a lot of time the loyalty is going to be higher because it was us that made that leap in investing in somebody that was new to this industry. So it's worked out well for us. I mean, we're still in the process of hiring and growing that team. It doesn't mean that we still have technical skills that they have to complete, and they'll usually go through at least 3 interviews, if not more. But for somebody that's really dedicated and wanting to work with us, they'll certainly go through that process.
You said something that's not very common in the tech world. Tech world is very go fast, go hard, get products out as fast as we can.
Yeah.
Don't go slow. And so there really is a balance of making sure we build it right and correct, right? And rather than just quick and fast. And I feel like that's really great advice for a lot of people is, there might be a learning curve for some of the employees, but you get the right employee, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that is such a really good piece of advice for finding a team and hiring those on. Dan, I'm really kind of curious about a time that you failed. Like, you've been through a lot of different businesses, not technically 401 Go, but I feel like these stories of actual failure really resonate with people. So tell us about a time you failed And what did you learn, or what would you have done differently?
So a fun, easy one, and this kind of gives some flavor into the varied businesses that I've been involved in. My brother and I had the idea of starting a food truck.
The same brother or a different brother?
Same brother, same brother.
This is a completely different business.
Absolutely. It was so out of our element. And, we hired somebody to run it because we honestly didn't have the bandwidth for it. And I think certain businesses, you can get away with that, but not a food truck. Food trucks are about passion and everything else. And, and so we made the mistake of hiring somebody that was very passionate about, that always wanted to have a food truck, but didn't have the business background. And, we spent 2 years trying to make it successful, and it didn't happen. And we probably should have just terminated it after the first year, So I think it's kind of that sunk cost fallacy, that you hear like economists speak of, where, we've already put this much money into it, we have to keep it going because, this year's the year. We should have killed that idea a lot sooner rather than later. So I mean, that's kind of that's a fun one. We did ice cream. It's kind of like, I don't regret it. It was fun going to school.
Ice cream.
It's ice cream. You can't. I mean, well, we went wrong with ice cream. We didn't do a good job of it, but it was fun. Like, that's the other thing too. Is we had, fortunately, the capacity and the capability to take on a failure of that scale. I mean, it was we probably put $100,000 into it and lost all of it. And it was still a good experience, and we learned from it. But I think something more, maybe a failure that's more beneficial for this audience. And I wouldn't even say it was a failure, because we walked away from it, and it was a failure, but we let it fail gracefully, I think is probably the best way to put it. It was a consulting organization that we'd set up with another partner, where we did overseas consulting, predominantly in China. We helped manufacturers over there build brands and launch products here in the US. And so that involved the use of our ERP, a lot of our systems, marketing intelligence, and everything else. And really what it boiled down to is, between me, Nate, and this other co-founder, we just had very different visions of what the organization was. And the reason we had very different visions is because there was never a very clear vision from the beginning. There was something where we recognized there was a lot of value to be had in providing the services that we were trying to provide, but it was overly ambiguous. And because of that, we were all working on building value or solving a problem in the way that we were comfortable with. So this other partner, he was a product designer. And extremely talented, brilliant, works really well with manufacturers. And so every problem he solved was from, kind of that perspective. And, for me, I'm a marketer. Every problem that I was trying to solve for these clients was from a marketing perspective. And my brother was kind of the technical, the ERP, and the systems. And so we were all trying to solve the problem in our own ways. And in the end, it just didn't work out, really. And so we decided it was best for us to walk away and exit and allow that other partner that was more the product development person who really did, I think, a very admirable job of taking kind of the idea and turning it into something that was meaningful for him and for those clients. And ultimately, we decided it was best for him to kind of take that and run with it. So I think the takeaway there is that we all found ways that we could add value. I don't think there was one right answer, but we were all working on maybe a different question. We didn't understand what that question was. And so we were all kind of going about it in different ways. We were all working hard, but in the end, there just wasn't alignment. And so that's where it was best for us to walk away and allow that other partner to really take it and run with it. So that was something that in the end, I mean, the clients were taken care of, so it wasn't any sort of grand failure or whatever. But it wasn't the outcome that any of us anticipated.
That makes a lot of sense, because it's like, as a founder and as you start to like really bring people in, I feel like one thing that I think a lot of people push for is like a really, really clear vision, like at the beginning. And it's kind of hard when like you don't know what it's going to turn into super early. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that was like an awesome like learning lesson, like in general, because I feel like my vision changes like every day, and I luckily am surrounded by people that allow me to like realign. But for an app, or when you're in technology, I mean, it just takes that one person to suggest that one feature, and your product and that your vision could shift like completely to a different thing because with
Totally.
software it's so flexible. You can literally build
Yep.
anything.
Yeah.
And so it's wild. So kind of basically like in closing here, I mean, if you had to give like one piece of like nugget of advice to people just getting started, and we like to say like, what would you tell you 20 years ago? Like, what piece of advice would you give to people just starting?
I've got two. And I feel that this
Even better.
this is far. I didn't really understand or appreciate this as much as I do now. First and foremost is mental health. So we've got like this is and I'm sure you both have felt this. It's extremely taxing, taking on the problems and the scale and the responsibility and everyone that depends on you. It can be overwhelming, and unfortunately, I think that those who suffer the most are the ones that honestly are closest to us, or our family and our friends. And I think that I know for me, the kind of the justification for a lot of these maybe destructive behaviors or some of these things that were giving myself permission to neglect my family was all predicated on this idea of, well, I'm doing this for them. And while that is certainly true, it was also, it became a crutch. So I'd say first and foremost, mental health. Really do whatever you need to do to make sure that you can maintain some sanity, and that the people that matter most, you don't forget them. And I'd say that above all else. The other thing too that I regret not having done sooner was networking. I'm just kind of I'm very introverted, and I just love to see problems and to fix them. I'm very hands-on. I'm very operational. The thing that gets me excited is big problems and big solutions and messy things that I've got to work through. Getting out and talking to people, networking, even though I love it, it's hard for me to do. And I think it was especially hard to see the value in that early on. It's like I can, accomplish X in, a given amount of time, or I can take a lunch meeting where I don't know whether the outcome of that is going to benefit me or my business in any way. And what I've learned is that it does benefit you no matter what. Just having those human connections. It's, even in, these conversations here, that there's always something that I can take away from any sort of any human engagement that's going to make me a better person. And it's, again, we've all heard it before. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I didn't appreciate how true that was until really within the last year. So I'm making up for lost time and trying to connect and network with as many people as I possibly can.
That's such good advice. It's so funny because I will say that's probably, everybody always gives different advice, but that's such a really cool advice. First off, like just the mental health side of it, make sure you have that capacity. And two, I'm with you. That's probably one of my only values I have is I love to network with people. Even Austin's like, the only reason why I brought you into this business, Beaudry, is because you know people. Like that's all it comes down to. So that's awesome. I really do appreciate it. Dan, thank you for kind of being on the show. Where can our listeners find out more about 401 Go?
So we're very fortunate. We've got a .com.
Dog. I thought internet was just going to be a fad.
Yeah, it's ongoing. 401go.com is the best way to find out about 401go. And again, like I said, I'm making up for lost time, so I'd love to network. Probably the social media channel where I'm going to be most active and most attentive is LinkedIn. So find me on there and let's connect. I'd love to. I think that's the best thing about my job is just being able to talk to small businesses all day. Hearing about some of the really cool things that they're doing is super exciting. And I'm sure you guys get that same thing. Having business clients it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, watching them grow, right? Like just see everybody's passionate about their business. That's the one thing that I actually really love, and that's something that's really neat. So cool. Well, Dan, thank you again for being on. We'll add all of that into our show notes, and we'll take you out to lunch as a thank you.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, guys.